You mentioned Earth changes there, and marching down the timeline that I have, the four gas giants are lining up in the solar system to make a perfect square coming up in 2024. Now, when this happens, there'll be a second slight magnetic field in our solar system in addition to the one that's generated by the sun. So as the Earth passes through this magnetic field, we're going to have an enormous amount of Earth changes so far above anything that you have seen in the last 2,000 years at least. Mud volcanoes, landslides, sinkholes opening up. Talking about here, people who are going to be frightened on what they see coming through the skies will have heart attacks when they see these things that are unfolding in front of them in terms of Earth changes. So there's about 3 years left before this comes into at least the first wave. After that passes, we have one more wave through 2028. And then we come back on the backside here in 2030, and things start to dissipate out through 2032, 2035, and it should be back to sort of normal like it is today. We're going to go rolling through two of these waves, magnetic shifts on our planet here. And what are you seeing in the timelines for these Earth changes coming up? These things are going to be vast. It's really going to make a dent into food production globally. And if people can't eat, they're going to become very uncontrollable. And my take on it of what's happening in the US right now, you're right, it's a global plan under one world governance, one system. Governments are going to get so much more draconian in terms of locking down the citizens and making them do this or forcing them to do that. I think, this is my own opinion here, that the closer we get to these Earth changes that are so vast that we can't grow enough food to feed the planet, in response, the governments are going to be even more hard-handed with the citizens to control them because starving people are uncontrollable. So if you can control every resource before the problem, you can have the citizens obey, know what they need to do to get access to the resources. And if you step out of line, you're either crushed or there's no resources for you. So I believe they're doing that right now. And this is the first year of validation that we are in for some massive changes. I'm using solar diagrams to see where the planets are lining up out there. And we get this special configuration that only happens once every 2,000 years. I shouldn't say exactly 2000. The last time it lined up like this was 79 AD. Precise year, precise month of October. October of 79 AD, we're going to come into the same configuration again in 2024. But with as much infrastructure as we have around the world with roads and pipelines and bridges, it's going to create something called an ellipsoid Earth. Now, the Earth right now is what we consider sort of a sphere, a ball, if you will. There's going to be a second magnetic field tugging on our Earth in the outer solar system. It's going to be very slight, so it should only affect maybe the top mile of the crust. But it should be enough to cause an enormous amount of earthquakes, landslides, mud, volcano events, and this type of earth cracks, sinkholes. How do you think that would affect us? We would lose our infrastructure in the modern era, a lot of it. Not all, but a lot. How could we cope with that? We wouldn't be able to. And in addition, if the sun's magnetic field goes into a very low state, that would allow more space debris to come in. And yeah, it could be anything from small granular size, like a piece of sand size of something coming in the atmosphere. But there's a blue comet coming through in 2022 in the winter solstice. So again, a very strange timing. The perihelion of this comet is called K2 2017C. And it was the furthest away from the sun interacting comet ever recorded. And it was about a 20x difference than the furthest ever recorded comet to come into our solar system that started to interact with the sun, where it started to glow. And that's how they saw this thing. But it wasn't double the distance or triple the distance of the furthest one before. It was 20x further out. And this is going to be blue. And it's going to be large enough that in the middle of the day, it's going to be the size of the full moon, visible in the day, both hemispheres, blue. But in the evening time, it's going to take up a portion of the sky. And this is going to be coming through in the winter solstice 2022, December 21st, at the apex of the perihelion, where it rounds the sun at the closest. And then as it's exiting out through the 2023 era, you can only imagine what kind of sign this will be in the skies. Because, they talk about signs in the skies, signs in the heavens, and I do believe we're going to start to see plasma displays where the petroglyphs on canyon walls are going to start to form in the skies again. Because the ancients, you got to go back. I mean, we've lived through this history of earth changes, let's say since the last 30,000 years. We got cave paintings, we got rock art and petroglyphs everywhere. That same array of shapes and things that were carved into the rocks are going to come to life in the skies again. So signs in the skies is going to be an understatement as we come through some of these things. But that's why I'm coming to a lot of my conclusions here. It's not really dreams that I've had. It's more using the science of cycles and seeing magnetic fields and how these planets are lining up and what they do when two magnetic fields interact on each other. And I'll say one last thing. This second magnetic field forming in the outer solar system is going to be comprised of Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. And if you think about that, to the Earth, it's only Mars and then the Earth. And we're only going to be the second planet away from that second smaller magnetic field. And we'll have the sun stepping down very low in its activity, and we're going to be the third planet away. So we're going to have two magnetic fields overlooping right here where the Earth is in our orbit. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens magnetically, how people are going to behave with their brains, with the magnetism in the brain. And there's a lot of changes coming, but like you say, it's all been talked about and described before as to what to expect with these changes coming here. So I don't know if that pinged on something like before with the dates or something that I just talked about for possible changes that you could relate to that you've seen in the prophecies. So about 4,100 years ago, that coincides with a massive downshift in terms of temperature on the planet of about 3.5 degrees Celsius. Because at 8.2 K, and this is another interesting thing, there was another dropout in temperature where temperatures on the Earth dropped about between 8 to 10 degrees Celsius 8,200 years ago, and they called it the 8.2 K, as in 1,000 event. But then the Noah flood 4,100 years ago. And then we bring it up to right now, it would be right on that same cycle. So if we're going 82, 41 today. And I don't know if it's a step down because the 8.2 K seemed to wipe humanity back to 10 million human breeding pairs, if you want to call them, in a way to refer it as like how many people are on the planet. 10 million male-female pairs that could breed and then continue to have children to move forward off the next generation. So whatever was up to that point of however many hundreds of millions were from the exit of the last ice age and the Younger Dryas era, the collapse of it dropped 20 degrees Celsius for 1,000 years. And then suddenly the temperatures rose again. Humanity kind of reformed itself from, say, 10,300 years ago up until like 8,200 years ago. And the temperature dropped out and wham, they just got knocked back for whatever population over those several thousand years occurred. They went back to less than 10 million people on the planet. And then 4,100 years ago, whoosh, we got knocked out again to just how many, a handful of people that are still left. So what's it going to bring us to this time? Because the cycle seems to be more ferocious. And if we are stepping into a new ice age, you would expect this one to be just the mother of all drop-offs and resets. Because if we're stepping into a new ice age, we're talking about another 90,000 years of ice and complete 30 degrees Fahrenheit cooler temperatures across the planet. Everything ends at that point. If we drop off into one of these cooling events right now, would it usher in? Absolutely. There'd be so many electrical changes coming. It seems that it's on this correct timeline, and it seems energetically correct for shifts, changes, jumps, evolutionary leaps. I hate to use that word, evolutionary leap. When the electromagnetic field and the plasma field and the magnetics change heavily enough with cosmic ray bombardment, different species seem to pop out of nowhere. And it's not like, I hate that word evolution because I just don't believe in that. Oh, next generation, there's a 3-toed turtle, and the next generation, there's a 5-toed turtle. I just don't believe that at all. But these gigantic leaps in terms of new species that pop out because of the overlapping of all these extremes happening at the same time. Through geologic history, they're on a clock as well. And then we seem to be jumping right into another one of these. Everything's coming together now. We're talking like millions of year cycles coming right on top of the 100,000 year cycles, on top of the 25,000 year cycles, and the 10,000 year cycles, the 4,000 year cycles, the 2,000, the 1,000, the 50, the 200. They're all lining up right now in these next few years. It's quite interesting where we sit. This is literally like once in a couple million year event we're about to experience right now, if you want to put in that context versus a 4,100 year event.
So really the magnitude of what that is, almost not since creation could something even come close to what we will probably be experiencing within this decade up into 2030, 2031 on the max. It's going to be probably one of the biggest overhauls of planet Earth since it started. I mean, that's what everything's pointing to my understanding, and how it's paralleling within the generation concept, and also on the science side, the numbers are lining up. It makes me think of the wise men in those timeframes who were deeply studying, 3 wise men, under who were in their Magi clan, that they saw, and they were using so many different systems, and they saw, wow, there's something incredibly large that is happening. And they poured their resources and had their teams that actually went out, saw, they actually knew that something incredibly, but they probably didn't know to the magnitude of how big. So they poured all their resources and everything at that time to bring their best to meet the birth of the king. And how many people should have been aware of that? But they weren't paying attention. It's almost like the writing is on the wall. When we have this great reset underway, well, there's a bigger great reset that will look like what these people and what they try to control in their great reset will make it look like nothing. And on the other side is definitely that different existence, that transfiguration into a different being. The thoughts towards, just the connections. I could have questions for hours on just so many different things, like the lining up of Joseph's time frame, the specific minimum that happened there, the lining up of Daniel's time frame, the minimum that occurred there, the fall of Rome, the minimum that was underneath there, the year time frame of 1798 being huge in prophecy, coming out the tail end. So I'm seeing the synchronicity of how these cycles, how these huge biblical prophecies just happen to line up within these time frames.
People are deluding themselves that we're going to go back to 2018 or, the pre-virus thing, and we're going to return back to that old world. We're never going back there again.